So, together with that meeting, they released the quarterly statement on monetary policy, and that provides a lot more than information about what they think of than pure interest rates. There's an enormous amount of information on where they think the economy is going, and where they think the economy is going this year is they think that growth in the first half is about 1.3% and it picks up to 1.8%. Now, one of the interesting things for me that I've started to participate in only last week is I've been doing these polls for the AFR for years and years, but it's only very recently that I've been asked to participate in a poll, a quarterly poll that's done by the Reserve Bank itself. And so it's interesting for me to see the questions that I was asked last week when I participated in this poll and what's here. What they've got here is growth for this year at 1.8%, and it accelerates to, which is 24, and accelerates to 2.3% in 25 and continues to accelerate through 26. One of the questions I was asked last week was about the potential growth rate of the Australian economy. Back in the day, it was generally regarded that the growth rate was around about 3.2%. But at that time, productivity growth was high in the Australian economy. Looking at it now, and the data that I looked at last week, the potential growth rate is 2.6%. So what's actually happening in this data is the growth is accelerating to its potential growth rate of 2.6%. So you've got better growth year by year by year for the next 3 years. Now, as that's happening though, and that's interesting that they're both happening at the same time, unemployment is actually going up. It's not going up by much. Unemployment now is 3.9% here, 3.8% they expect, and it rises to the end of this year by 4.3% and then rises to a level of 4.4% and stays there. So another question that I was asked last week is, where is the equilibrium level of unemployment that would stabilise inflation? And I looked back through the data and I came up with exactly the number of 4.5% when I was doing that. And that's what I put in the poll. So what their view is very similar to the questions they asked and how I was reading the data last week. What's interesting is about where they see inflation going, and and it's particularly important for the future of interest rates that where they see is inflation is slowing, but it's slowing, but the decline in inflation is very, very gradual. So what we've just seen is we've seen inflation of 4.2%. This is core inflation. By the end of this year, that inflation falls by 3.1%. The year after that, 2.6%. It takes until the end of 2026 for inflation to get down to the middle of their target. That's 3 years. That's 3 years for inflation to get down to the middle of the target. And the result of that is, if you think that there's going to be big cuts in the cash rate, you should lie down and let the idea pass over. Because what happens in their cash rate scenario, and this is only a scenario, and Michelle Bullock came back to this a number of times in the press conference and said, "This is our scenario. We could hike rates, we could cut them. This is not forward guidance. This is not a forward plan, but it's their scenario. In their scenario, the cash rate falls from 4.2%." From 4.3% down, 4.3% now, all the way by the time we get in 2.5 years' time to 3.2%. So, hey, that's 1% cut in the cash rate over the next 2.5 years. Break out the champagne. So they're not promising any big rate cuts. They are promising a very gradual reduction in interest rates back to a balance. When they asked last week again, where I thought the equilibrium level of interest rates would be, I thought that it would be around about 3%, which is where they're going to get to in this, probably by the end of December 26. So in the whole cycle, you're going to get a rate cut of 1.25%. So forget about the idea of big rate cuts. Now, that's also true for the Federal Reserve, because the problem with the Federal Reserve is, now, of course, we expected, no we didn't, but we expected, it's common sense that the rate cuts we'd get would be small because our cash rate is the lowest in the English-speaking world. Our cash rate is already where we're starting from. It's lower than the British official rate. It's lower than the Canadian official rate. It's 1% lower than the New Zealand official rate, and it's a full percent lower than the Fed funds rate. So I'm already starting from a low base, and that's why when we cut down to long-term equilibrium, it isn't much. But it's not much of a cut. But for the Fed, they've got another problem that we don't have. They've got a really big budget deficit. And with their budget deficit, which is continuous budget deficit, 7% of GDP, they might have started at a Fed funds rate near zero. But when they get that down, as they cut that down, they can't cut that much below 4%. Otherwise, inflation blows out because the budget deficit is too big. So what you've got in this cycle, you've got rate cuts in the cycle, but they are much, much smaller than the rate hikes we've just had. And so rates are going to stabilise at significantly higher levels. And one other thing, in the press conference, Michelle Bullock was particularly disparaging of the forecast of the futures market, because she was asked by a number of the journalists, there've been 2 rate cuts this year, why aren't you, in forecasting the futures market, why aren't you cutting rates? And she said, we never use the futures market, and we never refer to it. So the futures market has absolutely nothing to do with the RBA's decisions. I can understand why there's a relationship in the futures market in the US where the capital raising of the banks is done through the wholesale market. But we have branch banking in this country, and the futures market and the capital market just doesn't have the influence that it does in the US, and therefore doesn't have the predictability.